Hi, I call this Tiki time. It is Tiki time. Today is a ramble on the adventure of Tiki. For those of you who do not know who or what Tiki is, he is the loudest big-beaked cockatoo that I and the rest of the family love, hate, and ultimately love more than the screams that he shares with us when he is calling in his flock twice, 3, 4, or more times a day. Tiki moved in with us around 12 years ago when he was about 14 years old. And he put on the "I am the sweetest, quietest, most well-mannered bird that graces this planet Earth" act. I say put on the act because he was just checking out the environment and seeing just what he could get away with, who he could bully, and who would be the alpha in the home. So around 3 weeks, and he started testing the parameters for cracks and what he could get away with. A scream here and there with a polite, "But I love you," when he was scolded. How can you scold a bird that says, "But I love you"? Did someone teach him that? Or did he really mean it? He slowly started what cockatoos do, and that is scream, calling in his flock whenever he did not see someone in the room, and that was all right at times, but not all the time. Then over the years he started to scream unless someone was paying complete attention and talking to him. It got so bad that at times my wife and my heart would hurt, and our ears would seem like they would explode in our head. There was no watching television because it competed with him, and Tiki would have none of that. So we bought some earphones to connect to the television, and Tiki could still outscream the volume on the television. We bought covers for his cage so he would be in darkness and be quiet. That seemed to work somewhat, but Tiki has a beak that can shred covers without much effort, and he is athletic and smart enough to remove them. Finally, we could not take it anymore. It had become what we determined to be a health problem for us. So I called Tiki's vet. Yes, for those of you who do not know, birds have to have an avian vet and checkups, at least bi-yearly, at a cost of hundreds of dollars, because blood tests, etc., have to be performed. So I told the vet, who knows the full Tiki story, that we're finally unable to put up with him any longer. She was so understanding, because she knows that cockatoos are screamers. It is just in their nature, and people that they own must understand that. Anyway, the vet gave me the name of a person who has a setting that takes in birds for breeding purposes. And when I called her, she said yes, she would take Tiki and turn him into a breeder who would never be a pet again. Now that sounded like a perfect solution for everyone concerned. Tiki, who would become a bird and have a mate to breed with instead of just a rope and toys to play with. Us, who would have some peace after years of being under the whim of a screaming cockatoo, who granted was sweet most of the time, and yes, we do love. So we vacillated for weeks about doing it, and finally, after a couple of days of intense screaming, we decided to take a drive to see where Tiki would be staying. Wow, what a beautiful place out in the country, with horses, dogs, peacocks on the grounds, along with birds of all kinds, mostly parrots, and cockatoos, and not just cages, but separate aviaries for each breeding couple. We were told that Tiki would be kept separate for months, maybe years, until they could be mated and then put side by side with a mate until they could be put into an aviary together. Needless to say, both my wife and I were extremely impressed and made the decision on the drive home to move on and give Tiki a new home where he could be a bird. 2 days later, we took Tiki along with his toys and said our goodbyes. Tiki was put in an aviary that had a cockatoo in the cage across from him. That cockatoo was alone, as he had killed his mate, and that is the reason he was isolated. Tiki was quiet, and then as we left, we heard him screaming. My wife and I talked about how we had did the right thing for Tiki and us to get over the sense of loss and feeling that we had deserted our pet, who was with us for 12 years. As each day passed, the quiet at home was deafening, and the pain in both our hearts grew and grew. I called and talked to Pat, the wonderful person where Tiki was at, after 2 days, and she told me that Tiki was doing fine. He was eating, drinking, and talking up a storm. Wow, that made me feel good for a few minutes, and I tried to convince both myself, my wife, and my son that Tiki was doing great without us. The woman told me that Tiki was doing fine, but she had reservations about how my wife and I were getting along without him. So if we wanted to come and get him, we could at any time. I told her that no, it was best for him to be there. She said she understood, but just to give her a call if we changed our minds. A week without Tiki was enough. Our hearts needed him, and we could put up with his screaming just to know he was home and that he was okay. So I called, and Pat told me that Tiki was just fine, but she knew that we could not do without him, as we loved him so much and could come and get him. Pat told me that Tiki would always be welcome there if we had a situation where we had to give him up, heaven forbid. But he would be welcome and loved along with all of her birds. So we drove to get Tiki, not knowing how he would react to seeing us or if he would even want to come home. If he was content there and better off, we were prepared to leave him and come home with peace in our hearts. When we walked into the aviary where Tiki was at, we were greeted with a shower of kissing sounds from him, along with a bunch of hellos and I love you from him. He was ecstatic seeing us and so happy to jump on my arm and into his carry cage to come home. We also were ecstatic seeing him and bringing a member of our family home. Yes, he does scream. Yes, he does call his flock in the morning and night, but he also says, I love you. And I really think he means it. Bottom line is, Tiki is home where he belongs, with his family of humans, reunited for good or for bad.